Greetings, everyone, all the masters of the Dojoverse. Welcome back to Art of One Dojo and another live stream. We did a live stream last week, and we got a really great response. We got some great viewer engagement, and we want to start doing some more of these on the streams because we actually like talking to you guys. We like to see where your thought processes are, the topics you want to talk about, because we steer the channel based on the response that we get and the interest in the topics that we get. And so far, you guys have been just absolutely wonderful and supportive. So today we're doing another live stream. We've got a lot of stuff in the works. So in addition to more live streams, we are nearing the end of the 𝗘𝗫𝗖𝗘𝗦𝗓, the History of 𝗘𝗫𝗓 episode. We're looking at November 2nd as a release date for that. So we've been really busy on a lot of back-end projects. We're excited to tell you about a lot of it. We have some more interviews in the works. We have the more history episodes in the works. And so today, we're just going to give it a couple minutes for people to get in here. But today I just wanted to talk about belt ranks because we've had a lot of questions about belt ranks and the importance of belt ranks and really how should we approach this topic, because there are so many points of views when it comes to classes and belt ranks and the black belt and any of the numerous colors that lead up to it. And we've covered this topic, in quite a few episodes, different pieces and different aspects. But I thought today would be a great opportunity to have a live discussion, a little bit of a platform to talk about it. Hello, Bill Taylor. I am doing wonderful today. Thank you. How are you doing? So what we're going to do is we're going to cover some questions. And these are questions that have been selected. We put out a call for questions last week. And this is some of the ones that came up and we figured they were related. So we're going to kind of group them together. So we're just going to give another minute or two for people to come into the chat. But yeah, we had this year has been interesting because we've been doing more interviews, as some of you have seen, and welcome, Kelly. Thank you. Welcome to the chat. So yeah, we've done a lot of new things this season, and there's so much that we're still trying to do. So we got a bunch of interviews in the works. We've put out a few, and we've got some more history episodes in the works. The 𝗘𝗫𝗓 one, like I said, is our big one that we've been working on this past year. It turned out to be a bigger project than we expected, but we're happy the way it's shaping up. We've had some great people involved in it. And we're just really excited to present it to you. So mark your calendars right now. Our release date for that, we are aiming for November 2nd. So just right around the corner. But on to today's topic. Today's topic, we are going to talk about belt ranks, their place in karate, the pros and cons, are they even necessary, and how to address people's attitudes about them. So our first question actually comes from Matthew Thompson, and he asked, what advantages and disadvantages do you see with the belt system? And do you think that it's possible to master the skills of a system without obtaining the corresponding master rank? I think that's a fantastic question. And there is a lot of ways we can answer this. First part, I think I want to answer the second half of that question first. Is it possible to master the skills of the system without obtaining the rank? 100%, absolutely yes. Because that belt really means nothing more than the time that you've put into your curriculum, in your dojo. It is just a material marker. And can you master a system without the belt rank? Of course, because many arts do it. Boxing doesn't have any belt ranks, or Muay Thai. And if you really look at it, the karate belt, as we know it, this colored belt has been around 100, 120 years maybe. So you have all the history before that where people mastered their arts. So the belt rank is a relatively new invention in the martial arts. And there's a lot of myths that go along with it. Like this, and even I'm guilty of this when I was growing up in first training, that the belt was this mystical thing. You think back, you look at the old movies, you're like, oh, wow, these belts have been around for, ages and hundreds of years and all the masters had it. No, it is a modern invention. Jigoro Kano, the founder of judo, he started the belt system. And let's debunk the big myth right now. People recite this all the time. I've had this conversation even just recently. There is the myth that belt rank started from wearing a white belt, and as the practitioner practiced and wore it and it got dirty, the belt would get darker and darker and darker and darker, and it would stain to darker colors until it got to black belt. As romanticized as that idea sounds, and it sounds like something that could be viable, it's not. It's a myth for a few different reasons. One is, if you look at any practitioner who has worn their belt for any extended amount of time, especially brown belts, black belts, and look at like BJJ, you've got blue belts and purple belts, someone who's worn their belt for a very long time, the belt is actually lighter in color. Belts don't get darker, they get lighter. And especially if you've got a belt that's made out of silk or satin or something a little bit more, a nicer quality belt, it's going to shred. And like black belts will eventually turn white over time just because they fall apart. So the notion that belts started as white and then they just got dirtier until they got black. It sounds great, but it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because belts fade. And also that too, unless you're physically rolling around in the dirt, there's really no reason for that white belt to turn black. And I know there's a mystique about whether you should wash your belt or not. You should wash your belt. If you've got a belt and it's black from dirt, you should wash it. But yeah, so that's a very popular myth. And then the other thing too is white belt wasn't even the first belt rank that was ever used. The black belt was the first belt. Jigoro Kano looked at the Japanese swim teams, and they were really big with the swimming competitions. The most proficient swimmers would get a black armband to wear on their arm, and all that said was they have reached a level of proficiency that they were experts and they have obtained the skills at what they do. So he liked that notion, and he applied that to the martial arts. So when he had students that reached a level of judo that he felt was a proficiency or an acceptable level, or showcase their skills, he gave them a black belt. So the white belt was not even the first belt. The first belt was black belt. So you either had no belt or black belt. And as things went on, he added to it. Then the color belts started coming in. Usually it was white, brown, and black. Now, what's interesting though is I have heard people talk about stories when they were training students that used to dye their belts. That wasn't uncommon, and this might be where some of the myth might have come from. I have talked to practitioners, and I have heard some Kenpo practitioners that trained with Ed Parker, back in the 50s and 60s, said that they got their white belt, but when they were promoted to yellow belt or orange belt, they had to dye their own belt that color. And then every time they got a belt promotion, they would just dye their belts. And that makes more sense to me because there's no reason why you can't dye your own belt. And with Kenpo and with many arts, the belt colors get darker as you go on, so it would be easier to dye the belt. But as far as the whole idea that belt started as a white belt and turned black over time, it's just as awesome as that sounds, it's just not true. So what do I think about the black belt, that its color fades with usage, and its philosophy? I like the way it looks. I mean, honestly, like I said, certain black belts, if you get like a good quality black belt, it's going to shred over time. And you look at the old karate masters, like the real old school legit karate masters, their belts are almost completely white. They've just got little slivers of black left on them. That's somebody who has spent time. It doesn't necessarily mean skill. Nothing about the belt says skill or a guaranteed skill, but it means that person's put in some time. And I do know people who like to get their black belt and they like to tie it and untie it, tie it and untie it, try to get that worn look. Personally, I think that worn look looks really cool. It's kind of just like showing age and experience. As far as the philosophy behind it, I just think as long as you understand what that belt means and stands for, I think the philosophy is great. It is a milestone to achieve. It's showing that you have completed a base part of your curriculum and that you are considered to be an expert in your material. Does it mean you can fight? Does it mean you're guaranteed to win everything? No, of course not, because there's too many variables in play and there's too many standards across different arts. A black belt in one art does not necessarily equal a black belt in another art. So to kind of go with this question. So what are the advantages and disadvantages we see with the belt system? And I want to bounce some ideas off of you guys because I know what I've seen just from the years I spent teaching children and chasing belts when I was younger and seeing people who chase belts. I think there's both a disadvantage and advantage to the system. And the disadvantages, I think there's too much importance put on it. And I think that's one of the things we have, especially in the West here in America. It has become monetized. It's become a marker. It's been a selling point. And people, tend to go to school and they look at that belt rank and that's their goal. That's their goal. It's like, it really shouldn't be your objective to get a belt. All that belt means is a marker in a curriculum. And the best analogy I can think of the belt ranking system would be like, think of grade school. You've got your first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade. Elementary school and grade school is broken up into specific grades, and there is a certain amount of curriculum within that grade. When you pass a grade, all that means is you've been through that curriculum and you've passed it with satisfactory marks. Some people get A's, some people get B's and C's. It doesn't mean you're, just because you passed the third grade, doesn't mean you're an A student, doesn't mean you're smarter than anybody else. It just means that you've put your time in and you've completed that curriculum. To me, the belt system is the same way. And a lot of people, unfortunately, fail to see it that way. They think that because they get a black belt or because they get a brown belt, that they're advanced, that they're unbeatable, or they should be considered masters. No, it is a curriculum marker. You've just passed this grade, you're on to the next grade. Now, whether you're an A student, B student, C student, that's entirely up to you and the work that you put into it. So a lot of disadvantages come from this discrimination between belts, and especially with different systems. Like I said, there's no standard. A blue belt in Kenpo is not the same level as a blue belt in Kyokushin or a blue belt in a jiu-jitsu class. They are completely different levels. And there's not a lot of standardization. We all pretty much assume that the beginning ranks, you got your whites, yellows, oranges. Those are pretty much deemed the beginning, and advanced is brown and black. But you've got that middle area. You got your purples, you got your greens, you got your blues. Sometimes you have half belts. Some systems use more colors, some systems use less colors, but it's rearranged. So I think there's the disadvantages. I think there's too much importance placed on belt rankings sometimes. Where is it an advantage? Let's see what you guys think. What other disadvantages are you guys looking at with belt ranks and the systems? And we got a few people in here now, so I'm glad to see everybody who's in here. Let's talk about this. So Tom Lyman says, yeah, on that topic, I feel a first degree in some styles is not worth the same thing as it is in other styles, and I think that's perfectly fine as long as it's understood. Colors make it easy to divide class up between newer and advanced students when necessary too. Yes, and that's where I was going to go with the advantages of. In a classroom setting, the belt is a tool. It's a wonderful tool, especially with children, because you can group them. You can kind of, at first glance, especially if you have a large class or if you've got new students, you can kind of see who's at what level at first glance. Because if you have a lot of students or if you have assistant instructors who help out part-time, they might not always know each individual child or each individual student and what their skill set is. The belt ranks do help that as an organizational tool. I like what you asked about. Yeah, exactly. You feel that a first degree in some styles is not worth the same as other styles. I will 100% agree with that. Each martial art has their own requirements for black belt dan rankings. And I want to use Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as a good example because you've got the average karate style, probably 4 to 6 years to get a first degree black belt. Some of them are 6, like if you're in Kyokushin, it's 6, 7, 8 years. When you look at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it's an average of like 10 to 15 years to get your black belt. And I like the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu system with the belts because of all the martial arts out there, I feel they're the most consistent in terms of the colors that they use. There's some slight variations, but it's almost always your white, your blue, your purple, your brown, your black. The thing though is there is such a standardization and expectation that comes with that. But if you look at most martial arts systems, that when you reach your black belt, that pretty much means you've reached your curriculum. You have mastered your basics. You've learned all the individual pieces. And from that point on, you start to learn the deeper applications. You start to learn more theory. You start to learn more advanced techniques. You start to learn more formulation. And you really start to take all your basics and make the system your own. In Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, that phase seems to occur around the purple belt level. And at that point, too, to get a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it's like a 6-year, 7-year process. So I personally feel a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the equivalent of a first degree black belt in many other arts, because at that point, they've seen the curriculum, they've learned the material. At that point on, it's them refining it, put in the work hours, put in the literal blood, sweat, and tears, getting some teaching points, getting some, making it their own. So I would 100% agree with that, Tom. I think there is a varying degree of what the black belt ranks stand for when you compare to different systems. I could have a black belt in karate. Okay, I've got a black belt in Kenpo. I'm going to walk to a Shotokan school. I'm not a black belt in Shotokan. I'm putting a white belt on because I am not a black belt in their material. If I go to a BJJ school, I'm not putting a black belt on because that will make you a target. If you walk into a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school with a black belt on and you are not a black belt in that art, you are going to have a very bad day because they will test you. And if you are not at that level, you're not going to pass that test. So yes, and that's part of the disadvantage. I think there's too much importance placed on that belt rank. That black belt is it's this mythical mystique thing. When people join the martial arts, it's like that golden chalice everyone goes after. And it's nice to have that goal and it's nice to look at it as a milestone, but you got to balance that line. You got to walk that fine line of, is that really the important thing? Or, why do you want that belt? Do you want it because it's just a black belt, or is it because you've achieved something to get it? I'm a 3rd degree black belt in the Shaolin Kenpo Karate. I'm going for my 4th next year, and I've been studying martial arts for almost 30 years. That's awesome. Congratulations. Once you get your black belt, going for further dan levels is not always an easy thing. Some arts is easier than others. But yeah, so we're going to come back. We're going to come back to the black belt rankings, how to handle that. But so yeah, so as far as advantage in school, I think the belts can do a lot of good in the school because it is a marker. And let's be honest, a lot of people don't have an attention span, especially when you're talking with children. even though the material might be important and it's life skills and it's learning self-defense, when you have kids who are 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, that doesn't always quite register with them. And karate, learning the martial arts is really cool at first, but for a child doing the same material for 4 or 5 years, it can get tedious for them. It can get boring for them. So as instructors, we have to find ways to keep them engaged, to keep things fresh. And I think the belt system is great for that. We don't have to make them dependent on the belt or teach them that the belt is the important thing, but it's still a good note of progression. They feel a sense of accomplishment, that they've done something and that they worked hard. It's just something to show for their hard work. And I think that is a really wonderful tool in the classroom. Outside the classroom, that belt is just a piece of cotton or cloth or whatever it's made out of. It could be a piece of rope. It doesn't matter. It's material. But in the classroom, it does have meaning and it can be very, very useful. In a lot of schools, and we did this when I used to teach for this other local Kenpo school, we had some kids who started young. And the younger they start, the harder it is to work with them because there's only so deep of material you can get into with a 3-year-old. At that point, they're learning coordination and balance and just discipline and instruction. But as they go on, they can build on that material. And we had several kids, going from white to yellow belt. They were with us for a few months. They really weren't quite ready for that yellow belt. They had behavioral issues we were still working on. They were far from having any sort of the material. So, sometimes you will see half rank. So if we had a kid that did really half rank balance and they think it's just, it's a selling tool to the parents. Well, it's not a selling tool if, we didn't charge for the belts. And it was just so the kid can see some progression, because a lot of kids I notice when they earn something, especially if they're a troubled child or that they have a behavioral issue, if they earn something, sometimes they kind of take on a little bit of extra responsibility. So a kid who's a white belt, who's been a white belt for 3 months, 4 months in the classroom and tends to be disruptive, if you point out the good things that they've done and you kind of recognize their hard work and then they earn another belt, sometimes you see that change and they're like, oh, okay. It's a little bit of growing up, and there's still a long road ahead of them, but you do see incremental improvements, and we saw that all the time. And I think the same thing too, with you have these troubled kids. If you give them a responsibility in class, I noticed that helps too. We had a couple kids that were like white belts, or not white belts, but like had just gotten their yellow belt. They still had listening issues. They still like to goof off. Whenever we had a brand new student class, I would pair them up with that brand new student. I'm like, okay, look, you got to set the example. You got to help so-and-so. And it's the same thing too. It kind of changed their mindset a little bit. They're like, okay, it gave them a sense of responsibility. And sometimes you saw an improvement in their own behavior because now they were trying to be a role model for someone else and they were trying to achieve something. You gave them something to be proud of. And I think the belt system within the classroom is fantastic for that. As far as a reward system and a motivational system for children, especially, and honestly, some adults, I think it could be a fantastic thing. So as a training tool, I think the color belt system has a lot of fantastic applications and advantages. So I'm personally not a fan of it, but I do understand why it's there. But if I were raising students, I'm more interested in developing skills. Kids, I would do a belt system. Adults, I'll be on the fence. And that's fair. And that's fair because, and I commend that because you're focusing on the material. And adults are a lot more likely to grasp that concept. It's just that kids can grasp it. I just think that sometimes the belt system can be useful if you use it in the appropriate way. It can just be a motivational tool. It's like giving kids stars or certificates in school. Sometimes it makes them feel good and motivated enough. It's just enough for them to realize, hey, I put in my hard work. I'm recognized for that work. It makes them motivated to want to do more hard work for the next level. A tool, a building tool. I agree with you. There are so many different styles out there. All have their strengths and weaknesses. It's only respectful to wear a white belt if you're trying a new style. 100%. 100%. If you are going to a brand new school, I think that the etiquette says you put on a white belt. Do not assume whatever rank. If you're going to a brand new school, I would hope that you would talk to the instructor first. And a lot of instructors will tell you, just wear your belt. Whatever rank you are, just wear your belt. And if they do tell you that, then that's fine. But they might still make you start over at the beginning material. If it's a completely different art, you're likely going to start at their white belt level and just work your way back up to match where you are. But never assume if you're going to a brand new school, it's just respectful to wear a white belt because you could be a 10th degree black belt in karate, but you go to BJJ, you're not a black belt in that style. And vice versa. Black belt in BJJ, going to a karate school, put on a white belt because you were starting something new in someone else's house with new material. And sometimes it feels good to put that white belt on again. It's a kind of a reminder, hey, there's so much more to learn. There's so much more I don't know. And when I did the jiu-jitsu, when I started doing jiu-jitsu and judo about 3 years ago, putting that white belt on, it felt great. And I had that like, okay, good, I'm starting something new. My first couple weeks of classes, I felt like a white belt. Like I would have been ashamed to wear the black belt in that class just because it was such new material that it made me realize, okay, I don't know this. This is why I'm here. This is why I'm learning this. And like I said, with the hundreds and thousands of martial arts out there, I think that logic applies across the board. Jess Danielson, I would like to know your opinion on my question asked at the 50. Could you please repeat the question? I did not see you post it. I'm not sure if I can scroll back to see that. If you don't mind repeating that, that would be great. We were talking about, so those are the advantages and disadvantages of the belt systems. And yes, there are belt factories, and this is a problem. And I think it's pretty easy to identify schools that do this, but a lot of schools will use karate belts as just marketing tools. And if you go to a school and they've got, rainbow belts, they've got camouflage belts, they've got gray belts, they've got weird color belts, but they've got like 20 belts in all, and they're charging you $100 per test. Okay, and you're likely looking at a belt factory. Not to say those colors can't be used. We'll come back to the camouflage belt because I do believe there is an application for that. But you can tell when a school is trying to milk the belt system, because when they hit you with a ton of fees, or they make you retest for it, or they just keep handing belts out, promoting students faster than they should be, and just keep leveling up belts, multiple color belts, is a good sign that money might be the motivation, especially if they're charging an arm and a leg for it. A small belt fee, I think, is reasonable, like a $25 belt fee or whatever, because if the school's giving you the belt, it's just the cost of the belt. But let's get to the camouflage belt real quick, because I have heard people bring this up. A lot of schools are made fun of for using that. And sometimes it can be weird. My second instructor used the camouflage belt, but it was not a rank. What he would do is he would pick out a student every week. Any student who stood out from the class, like really tried their hard, really took on a leadership skill, and really showed great attention, they became student of the week, and they got to wear that camouflage belt. And that camouflage belt gave them limited authority. They got to help, they got to choose the first few workouts. They got to walk around the class. They got to be a helper. And it was such a wonderful tool. And we saw such a change from these students too, that when they got that belt, they assumed a role of responsibility and they took it serious. And at the end of that week, they got to put in their input with my instructor to choose who the next person was going to be. And then they would hand the belt off to that person. Applications like that, I think, are wonderful teaching tools, because you're forcing kids, you're taking the importance off the belt itself, but you're making them focus on the responsibility and privileges that come with it. Wearing a white belt in a different style shows emptying your cup for that style and purity knowledge. Absolutely. 100% agree with that. So let's see. What do you think of Jesse Incamp's pink belt? I like it. He wears that pink belt a lot. I like it in a couple different ways. Well, one also too, you will see organizations wear it in support of cancer support, but that pink belt, it takes a strong person to wear pink and wear it proudly. And I think him doing that is a wonderful thing. And there's a lot of belts that do that. There's a lot of statements you can do to do that. I have known a lot of black belts that will wear white belts just because. We had, at my third degree black belt tests back in 2009, we had a guy testing with us, we had a seminar before the test, and he came in as a white belt. And I worked with him as a partner in one of these drills, and I could tell right away, I'm like, this guy's not a white belt. He knows some stuff, because he was strong, he was solid, he was fast, he was sharp. I didn't know what he was, but he wasn't a white belt. Well, it turns out later at the end of the class, he was testing for his third degree black belt with us in the same style of Kenpo. He just chose to wear a white belt that day. He was visiting a school, even though he was in the same art, he still put on a white belt. And I think that's awesome. And I have known black belts who do that on occasion anyway. It's a good reminder. It's a good practice sometimes. I want to go on to the next question. Jason V asked, why do some people lose interest and quit after getting the black belt? And how would you keep some motivated so they don't get bored and quit quickly after getting that black belt? That is a fantastic question. And I do think that relates to the problem and disadvantages of the colored belt system in general. It's a goal. Too many people start the martial arts looking at that trophy. If you're treating the black belt as a trophy and the martial arts as a hobby, once you get that trophy, you're going to stop. A lot of people just want to go from A to B, get that belt and be done and say, hey, I accomplished this. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. And I think that it comes down to the individual person. Not everyone is a diehard martial artist or a lifelong martial artist. They want to learn a little bit of self-defense, or they want to try something new. They want to learn a bit of culture, or lose some weight, get some exercise. The black belt is that marker. And unfortunately, a lot of people think the black belt is the end. And it's not. The black belt is really the beginning. All that means is you've just completed your basics. You now understand all your basics and how they work. Now it's time to formulate. And it takes a person who's really committed and interested to go forward to explore that formulation. And I think it's a mixture of people who don't understand that don't understand that the black belt is just really the first rank. And some people think that means you've mastered it. And we've had so many parents in class come up to us and be like, you know what, our kid's been here long enough. We want him to test for black belt next month. Kid's still 2 belts away from even testing, and he's been gone for a year. And we're like, no, because one, what kind of message is that sending your student, your son? But two, he only has half the material. He's got to earn it like everyone else. So the black belt is looked at as this trophy, as this end line, this finish line, and it really is not. And that comes from the teacher, imparting that knowledge onto the students. But we talked about statistics before. When people who join the martial arts, I would say about 1 to 3% of the people who start the martial arts will go far enough to get a black belt. That is a major drop off. And you go to your first martial arts class, you look at all the white belts and all the people in the room around you, and assuming that you do stick with it all the way through to 4, 5, 6 years, however it is, let's see how many of those people are with you at that day. It's going to be like 2 or 3. And that's exactly what I was told. And that's exactly what happened. I was the last surviving student of my school. When I started, the school was about 4 months old, so no one was hired in the yellow belt. And this was back in 1993, and I stuck with it. I went to every test. I missed a couple, but I worked hard, and we had new people come in. Old people dropped off over time. We worked up to our first degree black belt. Then we had a lot of curriculum changes. We had instructor changes, but I kept coming back. And by the end of 2015, actually even earlier, by 2013, for my 4th degree tests, I was really the last student there from the original school, from the original my first day in class, because I just didn't want to quit. Once I got a taste of it, I didn't want to stop. But if you're one of those people, you're joining the martial arts and you love it, and you're going to keep going forward, you're going to keep going with it, just be ready that most of the people around you that would start with you are not going to be there at the end. You're going to have a different family at the end of that journey. So I think a lot of people will quit the martial arts at black belt because they don't necessarily know there's more, or they've accomplished their goal and they want to move on to something else. And it's to each their own. Not everyone has to be a dedicated 30-year, 40-year martial artist. That's just not everyone. But for those of us who are, we know what that means, and we know what it means to go forward. The Gravetender asks, is the belt system Americanized? Some Muay Thai practitioners talk smack if the school for Muay Thai has the belt system. Good question. It wasn't an American invention, but I do think it is Americanized in many ways because, unfortunately, because of the market behind it and the way it's been commercialized, a lot of arts in America realize that that's what's expected from American students, and a lot of arts will adopt it for themselves. There are some Muay Thai schools that, not many, but there are a couple I've seen that will adopt the belt system or some sort of colored ranking system. You see a lot of Kung Fu schools. Kung Fu does not have belt ranks. Their ranking system is completely different. It's more of a family hierarchy. It's more of a relationship system. But in America, you will see some schools, they'll use belts. Some will use sashes, colored sashes. Some use colored T-shirts. So yes, to answer your question, I do believe the system has been taken from what it was intended for as a market in karate, and it has spread. It has spread around the world to multiple different arts. And in America, I think it's become such a marketing tool, or it's become an expected tool, probably because of media and the allure put on black belt, that a lot of American schools have adopted the belt ranking system just to fit along with the expectations. Does it really matter? I don't think it really matters so much, as long as the material is good and you're learning what you want to learn and that it's quality teaching. But yes, I do see that trend. And it's really interesting to see how the belt system really spread. I mean, it was a judo, ranking system, and it went through different versions. And fun fact, at one point in time, I believe in judo, early days of judo, white belt wasn't the first rank. There was a sky blue belt first, and then there was like 2 degrees of white belt. So it changed quite a bit. But what fascinates me is that Jigoro Kano and the people he trained with and his friends and other martial arts masters that work with him, they adopted it for their own systems. And then you started to see the different colors break out. But it's spread out through a lot of Japanese arts. It's gone to Brazil. It's gone to jiu-jitsu. It's come to America. It's come to some kung fu schools here. Even went back to Okinawa, which I find that interesting because the Okinawans started karate and it went to Japan, but the belt system found its way back to Okinawa. So the whole belt ranking system is kind of a phenomenon and a force of nature in its own right. It has taken hold. It has commanded expectations. It is the icon of karate. When the average American or the average person thinks of karate, they think of a white gi with belts. And that's just, the reality of it. And I think, and that's fine as long as we understand the real importance behind the belt. It doesn't mean you can do something. It means that you have knowledge. It means you've been through academic material, and it means that you have accomplished time in a system. It doesn't guarantee rank. But yes, I will agree with that in America, the belt system has become Americanized, or I'd rather prefer to call it commercialized because of consumer expectations. I mean, there are black belt degrees. That's where the belt system seems, Yes, the black belt degrees, this is interesting too, because this is something that's going to wildly vary between different martial arts systems of the world. Yeah, there's a lot of questions coming about the black belts. Black belts, and that actually goes into the next question too, is McCurb asks, does American Kenpo have a time and grade requirements for the Dan level? So I'm going to merge this all together. So let's talk about the different black belt ranks. Once you achieve a black belt, that's your first dan, your first level. And then you want to go for 2nd degree, 3rd degree, 4th degree. Every system has a different amount of degrees. 10 seems to be about average, even though if you look at arts like Shotokan, they didn't go above 5. Some schools still don't go above 5. There are a couple arts that will go a little bit higher. We'll cover this later, but technically, judo has up to 12, though I don't believe anyone has ever been awarded that rank. But the way it was written or the way it could have been interpreted in the past was there could have been a theoretical 11th and 12th degree. I believe that's been corrected now. But my point, though, is every system is different. So a requirement for a 2nd degree in one art is different. In Taekwondo and a lot of the Korean arts, they tend to advance a little bit faster because there's still curriculum. And I have not trained, so do correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe a lot of Korean schools will have more material past 1st degree black belt, so that way they still treat 1st, 2nd, 3rd dan as ranks, like colored belt ranks, as you would attain them. You get to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it takes a much longer time to get it. In Kenpo, to answer the question, in Kenpo, is there a time and grade requirement? There's supposed to be. There is a technical etiquette for the belt ranks. I believe it's once you get your 1st degree black belt, you should have 1 year between 1st and 2nd, 2 years between 2nd and 3rd, 3 years between 3rd and 4th, 4 years between 4th and 5th, or something along that lines, and then 5 years in between each rank after that. That's what's generally expected. And there is curriculum, depending on what Kenpo manuals you're working from. There is still belt curriculum up to 5th degree. But a lot of schools don't observe that. And especially when Ed Parker passed away and everyone split off, every organization did their own thing. Some people rushed and gave themselves, from 6th, 7th degree, they just gave themselves a 10th degree. I know people who got their 1st degree black belt, started their own school, threw in elements of another art, and called it a new style, and they deemed themselves 10th degree of a new style, even though they still first like a move and have knowledge of a 1st degree. So there's a lot of that. So is there a standardization? There is. Does everybody follow it? Not even close. And a lot of arts are like that. And a lot of arts, you've got material for the first 2 belts, but after that, it is time and grade in the system. And that's up to each art. Sometimes, it gets to a point where the belt ranks are honorary based on what you give back. I do believe for you to achieve, once you're done with the material, you should be giving back to the art, whether you're coming up with new theories or, you want to go to route like Just Speaking with Kenpo 5.0, here's what I learned. Let me take the system in this direction and put my mark on it. Or you write a thesis and you focus on specific combat aspects of it or theoretical aspects of it and you teach. If you're giving back to the art, if you are adding to the communal database of the art, then I think that earns you experience and that earns you honorary ranks. And I have nothing wrong with that. And I know 10th degree black belts that don't move that much better than the color belt. And I know 10th degree black belts that are extremely deadly if you were to cross them. And it's everywhere in between. Okay, so would you personally consider someone a black belt after getting it who no longer trains? Would you consider someone a black belt after getting it? Are you saying that they got their black belt and they don't train anymore? Are you asking, are they still a black belt, or do they get it later after they stop training? If they get it after they stop training, that's a little bit of a shady area. I don't like that as much. I think you really have to work to earn it. As far as if you stop training, like if you got your black belt and you stop training, do you consider that person a black belt going forward? Overall, I would say yes, because they still have that knowledge. They might not be in shape anymore. They might not be practicing anymore. They might not be able to defend themselves or fight as well as they did when they got it, but they still have the knowledge. And if they're still able to impart that knowledge, then technically, I mean, okay, you graduate high school. You don't go to college. You don't do any more further education for 10 years. Are you still a high school graduate? Yeah. You might not remember everything you did, but you still accomplished that. You might not be able to teach it well, or you might have to refresh before you go back to school, but are you still a graduate? Of course. And that's how I look at it. Yes, you're still a black belt, but the quality of that training is going to vary based on that person's lifestyle and what they've decided to do with their training since then. And that's actually kind of, I don't know if any of you guys have noticed, this is a little personal journey I'm on myself. I have put away my 5th degree black belt for now. I've been wearing just a solid plain belt because it's gotten to the point where when I tested and I got that belt ranked, it's been several years already, and there's a lot of material I haven't touched. And it's mainly because a lot of different life things happen. You know, my work schedule is through the roof, like you guys wouldn't believe. We had some family issues going on, you know, my father's health, and I did a lot of teaching with children. And with the children's material was really, the children's curriculum was just the first couple belt ranks of the adult curriculum. So that's what I focused on for so many years. White, white, yellow, orange. I know those very, very well. The brown belt stuff, I haven't touched in many years, unfortunately. And that's bad on me. And I've gotten to a point, I'm like, you know what? I want to refresh. I don't feel like I represent what I should because I worked so hard for it, but now I've gone in this direction and I've been focusing on this material. Let me go back and remind myself what there is. So this question kind of relates to me on that. Are you still that rank after you get it later? You are, but I think it's good to go back and you want to maintain it. Any way you can do to maintain it is the better. And I really respect Kyokushin. I know a lot of Kyokushin schools, because I've talked to some of you guys out here, that when you achieve a black belt rank, and I like this a lot. I have a friend, one of our viewers on here, Juan. You're awesome, sir. He would tell me that at his school, he got his 3rd degree black belt, but it's temporary. You get like a temporary belt for a year that you have to, before you can get your official belt, you have to maintain. Like you got the title, you've got the rank, but you have to maintain that level. You have to maintain that training, that effort, that teaching, and then it becomes, crystallized after that. Then you get your officially promoted belt. And then I like that message because the message is, hey, you're not done. You might have reached this done, but you're not done. You have to uphold this. When you put that black belt on, you're representing a standard, and it's up to you to represent that standard. And whether, whatever art that is, and even if it's a martial art where you don't have belts, but if you become a disciple in Kung Fu, or if you reach another, whatever ranking level you have, it's up to you to maintain that both mentally and physically. And it's hard, and it's a conflict. And I think it's where a lot of issues come from, because some masters and some higher ranking students get to a point of 8th, 9th, 10th degree. A lot of them aren't practicing anymore. They have that knowledge, they can teach it, but is it fair to judge them because they can't do a jump spinning hook like they could when they were 20? No. I think as long as a person has really digested that material and can still impart that knowledge and can still utilize it and still give back to the community, then I think they are every bit that rank as the day they earned it. Some students are talented and they pick up the material quicker. That's not a lie. That is not a lie. And that's another issue. And thank you for bringing that up. Douglas, thank you for, no, was it Douglas? Yes. Thank you for bringing that up, because I like to talk about this, because especially working with kids, excuse me, you can see a lot of difference in children who are adept at the material and who struggle with it. There are prodigies. There are kids out there, like people, talk about, make fun of the Karate Kid. Oh, these kids learn for a couple months and they're like karate masters. Is that realistic? Not really, not in the way it's presented. But I have worked with kids who have picked up that material like that. They're a natural at it, and they have the hunger for it. We had, oh my God, we had this young student, actually two of them, a boy and a girl, and they would come to class every day, and they were like white, yellow belt levels, and they would learn, and they would just be fully intent on what we were teaching. They asked us questions about why. You know, they were asking us technical questions. I'm talking at like 8 years old, 9 years old. They would go home and they were going up on YouTube and looking up these moves on YouTube and looking ahead and coming back to us and asking, Mr. Dan, what is purposeful compliance? And I'd be like, well, that's a concept you don't really learn until you're in the, you know, a few belts level ahead of you. But they were looking ahead and coming back and asking us why and how it related to what they were learning. And then they were actually taking it upon themselves to help struggling students. Some kids and some adults can just take to it. My instructor had an assistant, teenage, maybe 18, 19 years old. Within a year, he was a probationary black belt just because, and I don't generally usually agree with that, but in this case, he took that material so well that within a year, he was moving like a black belt. He was fighting like a black belt. It was just curriculum, but he was able to digest it faster than a lot of other people can. So absolutely, there are people who can, and it's a small fraction, but there are martial arts prodigies who are just naturally athletic. The material makes sense to them. They can move, and they understand the material. And if they have that hunger, watch them go, and they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. That is a wonderful point you brought up. I'm still training, working off cardio. Yeah, you're not gonna get any better cardio training in any martial art, especially, you know, rolling, grappling, kyokushin, sparring. Some of the best cardio you're gonna get. Kenpo seems like a mix of kickboxing, wrestling, and jiu-jitsu. Studying its curriculum online was good for comprehending a smaller curriculum like Shotokan. Okay, I'm not sure which Kenpo. You spelled it with an M, so I'm not sure which Kenpo you're talking about. There's a lot of different Kenpo systems. A lot of them are based off of kickboxing and ninjutsu and kung fu. You're going to find a major mix. And as far as American Kenpo goes, Ed Parker goes, its roots come from some kung fu arts, Chinese arts, a little bit of Japanese karate, boxing. Ed Parker was an avid boxer. He was also a judoka. There's a lot of judo, and I mentioned this in the last live stream. There's a lot of judo and grappling elements in Kenpo. A lot of it is buried. A lot of it I didn't start to discover until I was training in judo, but it is there. So a lot of Kenpo arts are mixed. And that brings up another question too. What do you guys think? If you were training an art, say Kajukenbo, or an art that's a mixture that's got grappling mix in it, and you get a black belt rank in that art, or in this mixture art, so say you have a hybrid art, and you get a black belt in your hybrid art, and then you go to a judo school, a judo only school. Do you think that black belt should translate over to that judo school, or should you start over? My opinion is, again, I would talk to the instructor. I would probably wear a white belt to go in and let them assess where I'm at. And if they feel that I'm at that level, great. If they feel like I'm midway, great, whatever. Because sometimes hybrid systems don't have an entire curriculum. They take the best of. And MMA is the perfect way to look at that. People are saying start over. I think I would agree with that. I would start over just because a lot of hybrid systems take the best or what they feel is relevant and complementary to what you're training. It's not necessarily the whole system. Going into judo, there's so many moments I'm like, oh, we do this in Kenpo. Oh, we do this in Kenpo. I can't tell you how many times I was like, huh? It's something that was so foreign, and it was a whole different learning curve. And I think MMA is a great representation of this. And this question came up in the last episode. Will MMA eventually become its own art? I think one day we're going to see a branch of MMA become a style, but it's because you've taken the best of Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, best of boxing, some Taekwondo and Karate. There's disciplines mixed in there, but you look at your top-end MMA fighter, they might not necessarily have an entire BJJ curriculum. They might not have an entire karate system or an entire Muay Thai system. They're taking the strong elements that are going to blend together for them. So yeah, so I think that's a fun question to ask, is if you're in a hybrid art, where should you start off going to a new school? A lot of people are saying start over. I agree with that. I personally would wear a white belt to a new school and let that instructor assess, and whatever they tell you you're at, I would respect that. And this is also something, this is just me. Even if they tell me to retain my black belt, or even if I'm visiting a guest school, someone else's school, and it's of the same art, my personal thing is I know most schools line up by rank. I kind of like to stand in the back if it's not my school. I'm a guest. I want, they've got their senior students. So this is my personal thing. I don't know how everyone else feels, but my personal thing is I like to kind of stay in the back with the lower ranks just because I'm not going to assert myself as a higher rank in a guest school unless they tell me to come up front, unless they invite me, or if you're a guest instructor, that's a different thing. But I don't know. I like to show a lot of respect to new houses when I go into, just because it's not my art. It's not someone I've trained with. I just like to show that respect. And I think if you do that, they're going to notice it and they're going to appreciate it, and you're going to get along better and you're going to build a better bond that way. So you could be a really badass white belt and that's not so bad. It's right. That's not so bad, is it? Again, I have sparred white belts that have come into Kenpo as a white belt, but they're a black belt in something else. And I've had my rear end handed to me. Has happened more than once. There is nothing wrong with being a white belt. That white belt, actually, it's kind of fun. Sometimes you put on that white belt, it's kind of fun to see people be like, oh, that realization that if you are a black belt in another art and you start something new, that person knows. It's the same thing with, they work with you and that person goes, oh, they're not a white belt. Oh, absolutely. And then there's some people, like I said, who are just natural at it. You could have a black belt who's never trained a day in their life and they come to class and after a couple of weeks, they're a fighter. That happens. And that's awesome when that happens because you can learn from that white belt. And, but yeah, white belts, people look down at white belts. They've got the hunger and they can be very dangerous because they're not refined yet. So no, absolutely. White belts can be a force to be reckoned with. What do I think of Aikido? I have no personal experience in Aikido, so I can't really comment on it. I've been spending my time lately in jiu-jitsu, like traditional jiu-jitsu, stand-up jiu-jitsu, and judo. From what I've seen, there's elements I like, there's elements I don't like, but I'm not going to comment because I'm not going to pass any judgment because I have never stepped onto an Aikido mat. I cannot give a fair assessment of it. I think the people who do it look beautiful doing it. I hope it's applicable, and I'm sure there's certain schools that are better than others, like any other martial art out there. But I just think it's one of many awesome arts. Let's see. What is the minimum age you would give someone a black belt? To me, when I teach, I don't give anyone under 15 a black belt because, in my opinion, someone who is 10 won't be able to defend themselves against a 30-year-old. Excellent question. Sensei of Shaolin Kenpo Karate. Thank you for bringing this up. I have received heated messages from this before because we've done topics about kids getting black belts. Should there, shouldn't be. This is not an easy topic. And there's so many things I agree with and disagree with the whole concept. When I taught at the schools I taught at, we did give kids black belts, but they were junior black belts. And we were very, very adamant on specifying the difference between a junior black belt and an adult black belt. The junior black belt in our school, all it meant was that kid has now graduated from the kids' material. They understood that they had a certain level of adult material they worked on, then they got their junior black belt. And then from that point on, and that usually took them about 4 years on average, but from that point on, they started the adult curriculum to work towards their adult black belt, which was going to take them probably another 3-4 years. So if you do the math on that, if you've got a kid who starts at 5 and you're going to make them train 8 years, 9 years, okay, well, they're going to be like approaching their early teens. You're starting to dance that gray area of should they be a black belt or not. Would you say a 10-year-old defend themselves against a 30-year-old? Define defend yourself. Are they going to go fists up into a sparring match and take on a 30-year-old? Not very likely. If an adult comes up and they grab them, are they going to be able to do something to break the hold and get away? Very possibly. If they've been taught well, if they've got the reflexes. Defense in terms of they're going to beat up a 30-year-old, no, that's not a very realistic scenario. Although I have worked with some 12 and 13 and 14-year-old students who were built like adults. We had a 12-year-old in class. He was as tall as I was, and he had muscles, and he was strong. Is he going to put up a fight for a 30-year-old? You better believe it. Dude, I was a little apprehensive sparring him because he hadn't refined his control yet, but he had the size, he had the strength, and he had the skill. He had to work on control, but he had that skill. So some kids grow better than others. And yes, sometimes a 14-year-old or a 12-year-old can defend against an adult, depending on the adult, of course. Are you talking about a 300-pound bodybuilder attacking them? Probably not. But the average male, yeah, they had a fairly good chance. Again, if someone were to grab them or try to hurt them, they could at least have a very good chance to get away. So in my opinion, is there a minimum age? I don't think there should be a hard, dead set age saying, okay, 18 and no one else under. I think it depends, or it should be judged on the individual student when you feel like they've reached that point where they could defend themselves. If it's a 12-year-old who can defend themselves against an adult, then so be it. If they can't do it until they're 18, so be it. But I do think it's important, if it is a school that has a black belt program for children, I think it's important to make that distinction that these are not adult black belt ranks, that you are graduating your children's curriculum. Now you're going to the adult curriculum. So what we did was in the class for these kids, we made them work for it. It's not like they just got that junior black belt one day. They had to train for months. They had to do their miles. They had to do their push-ups, their calisthenics. They had to spar for an hour with each other, or 2 hours. They had to do 2 hours of techniques and katas. It was a whole day for them. They sweat. They cried. Sometimes they bled. They fought for their junior black belt like we would expect an adult to fight for theirs. So they got to wear a black belt in class, but they would have a colored stripe through that belt, or a colored tip to say, okay, now you're a white belt in the adult material, you're starting over. And then they would work for months. And after several months, they would get the next color belt. So by the time they got their adult black belt, or they were ready for their adult black belt, they were 15, 16, 17. They were at the age they could perform. So no, I don't think there needs to be a hard, dead set, definitive age. I do think it needs to be a range. I think anywhere from 12 to 18, anywhere in that range, only because I have seen a handful of 12-year-olds who could. It's not common, but there's a couple out there who can do it. It's got to be when you feel that student. They have to have the curriculum for one. They have to understand the academics behind it. Like, they have to know they can't just memorize the moves. If that student can do the moves and they understand why they do those moves, and they can formulate and freestyle and make good judgment calls and have that discipline, then how have they not earned that as opposed to anybody else? If they can do it, then I think they've earned it. And that's just my personal opinion. I know a lot of people say there should be a hard age, and that's fine for your school. I'm just talking about where I'm coming from. I feel that black belt, you're really representing your school. Something really important for the schoolmaster to keep in mind. Yes. It's not just a trophy. You are becoming a poster for that school. So however you perform reflects on that school. And this was, I'm going to keep details limited here. This was a point of contention with my second instructor and the school I was teaching for. It was not his school. I was teaching for another school. We had an instructor who was a brown belt. An assistant instructor. He worked with the kids. He was going for his first degree black belt. He was working really, really, really hard for it. And we were going to have him test with the kids. They were going to get their junior black belt, and he was testing for his first degree. We had another instructor who was a first degree black belt. My instructor came up to us and said, hey, you should give this other guy, you should promote him to second degree. And we went, well, why? He goes, well, because it's going to look good for the school. He had not done a single technique towards a second degree black belt. He had not expressed any question or interest. Not to say he didn't want it, but he had not approached for us. He wasn't training for it. But we're like, but this instructor here, he's got his brown belt. He's going for his black belt. He is representing the school. He's working hard for it. We're not going to just give him a rank just to make the school look good, because you do that and they're not going to really represent that school. I know a guy whose family pushed him to get ranks. He was a kid. When I was a first degree black belt, I was 8 years into my first degree black belt, and he was in the kids class. He's a 5th degree black belt now, or he wears a 5th degree black belt. And it was one of those things, like, he jumped from school to school to school, and every time I saw him at a seminar a year later, he had another degree. There was some pressure there. He basically was belt chasing. Is he a 5th degree black belt? Honestly, I don't know. I have not seen him do his material. I have not worked with him. I don't know what he knows, but there's definitely belt chasing. And we were getting pressure from his parents, because he was still a young man. He was in his 20s. We were getting pressure from his parents to promote him to 6th or help get him to 6th. And, like, I can't advocate that. Kid's 20 years old. He shouldn't be wearing a 6th degree black belt, and there's just supposed to be, back to that time and grade, there's supposed to be a time and grade in the system. I don't know what he knew, and I can't endorse someone to do that. So you're absolutely right. When you put a black belt around your waist, you're not just saying to people, hey, look what I did. Look at the time I put in. You are representing that school. And if you are not representing it properly, you're doing a great disservice to the instructor and to the class who promoted you. Or if that instructor gave you that belt and you hadn't earned it, he's doing a disservice to you as well. So that's an excellent point. As an instructor of a particular style, how much discretion do you have to not teach techniques that you personally consider to be impractical? Good question. You have to, and actually Kenpo is a very good style to ask us about, because there's a lot of scrutiny over the American Kenpo self-defense techniques, whether they're realistic or not. And I'm not going to get into this now. We covered this last week. So if you're interested in really learning this topic more, check out last week's live stream. We totally went through learning Kenpo and how that's broken down. But we do have techniques where you look at it and you're like, why are we doing that? That's never going to work. And I had instructors and seminars who said, we're going to skip this technique because it's garbage. Doing what I'm doing now, going back to the material and trying to learn stuff at a deeper level, I'm looking for that connective tissue. Kenpo is very cohesive, and when you learn your techniques, there's a relation to other techniques, and the material, there's a lot of strings behind the system, and I'm just trying to understand those strings as best as I can, because I'm loving the art even more. But because of doing that, when I'm starting to see how one technique can relate to another technique, every single technique fulfills something in the curriculum, whether it's showing you an opposite motion of something else, or it's showing you a what if, or look, here's a weird strike that you're not probably going to know, but let's show it to you because that way you're familiar with it if you encounter it, or here's a weird scenario. Techniques that I looked at face value before and thought, that's stupid, that's never going to work. I'm looking at going, okay, I see what they're going for. This particular part is highlighting, well, what if this situation occurred? Or here's an alternate to this previous technique over there. When something is impractical, or you consider impractical, if you cannot find any use for it whatsoever, then that's your choice if you're going to teach that student or not. But if it's part of the curriculum, and if there's any nugget of knowledge whatsoever that can be pulled from it, take that part of it, show the technique, but say, hey, look, this is what we're focusing on because here's what's important, and here's how it applies everywhere else. And my second instructor did that. He was changing, the last 2 years I trained with him, he was changing the material so much, because we'd come in one day and we've got Kenpo techniques that have 10 different strikes in a row, and they're weird, some of them are. Well, he came in one day, he goes, okay, we're going to do this technique this way. And it's off like someone coming in for like a choke at your hand. You step forward, you wedge your hands forward, you poke them in the eyes, strip your arms down, hit the kidneys, do this weird hooking strike, but it's a whole complicated sequence. He goes, no, we're doing it like this. Step in, hit the eyes, strip the arms down, and he went to a double leg takedown. He made it an MMA move, and it worked fantastically. But that's the thing. He looked at the whole sequence, and that day he's like, okay, well, we like this part. How can we change the rest? How can we implement this in this scenario? And then, a week later, he changed the technique again. So if there's something that you consider impractical, maybe spend some time to see if you can find some practicality in it, because it's in there for a reason. Especially if it's an older art, these moves are in there for a reason, and a lot of stuff has been lost in translation, and a lot of knowledge you don't always get your first time through. I'm going back to white belt material. I'm still learning things that I missed the first time around, first 5 times around. If you can find a nugget of information in there, cultivate that nugget. And if you can't find any use for it whatsoever, then maybe talk to peers in your group and see if anyone else has any ideas. If it really doesn't work, then it's your option to not teach it. But my first suggestion would be, if there's a technique that you feel is impractical and you don't want to teach it to a student, see if you can figure out if there's anything worth transmitting, any knowledge worth plucking out of that and using it at all. That would be my recommendation for that. As a BJJ practitioner, I understand why we train in the Ghee. However, reflecting upon my past karate training, it seems unnecessary. Why do karateka wear the Ghee if they don't use it for its intended purposes? A lot of it, I think, is tradition. It's kind of weird, especially, again, back to here in the West. You act like you dress. Like if you're going to put on, like you're going to get into a martial arts class, you're going to step on the mat. Sometimes just putting that Ghee on with the belt and tying it up gets you in the mindset. Should that be the case? Probably not. But sometimes that helps you kind of get mentally prepared. Ghees in general I think are good for the classroom because they don't restrict movement. They let you move freely. And I'm talking the karate aspect. They let you move freely, learn your techniques. But I do believe there should be classes that work out in street clothes. And we did that at the very beginning. My instructor would have us go out in the parking lot in our shoes. We would do classes. I wish that was something we did more. But I do think that real clothing should be applied at some point. But as far as in the classroom setting, the Ghee is kind of a neutral thing to wear, just so that you're not restricting much of your movement. When it comes to grappling, though, that's a good question, because you have an art like judo, you want to wear a Ghee. You want to wear the appropriate Ghee. You don't want to wear a karate Ghee to judo because it's going to get ripped to shreds. It's not meant for that kind of tug and pulling. If you wear the correctly woven Ghee for judo or jiu-jitsu, it's really good to train with because you work on your grips, you work on your grasp, and you don't have to worry about your uniform getting torn or your clothes getting torn. But I do like the idea that sometimes that gi comes off and you go no gi. You do like a rash guard. That's a little bit more realistic. So I think a mixture of all. I think you should wear a gi. I think you should have classes where you don't have a gi at all, and you're just wearing rash guards to kind of simulate more of the clothing. And my jiu-jitsu instructor, he emphasizes this so much. He'll show us a technique where we do grab the gi, or we grab the collar, we grab the sleeve, but then he goes, don't count on that, especially here in Florida. People have a lot of bare arms. And if it's summer, they might be sweaty, they might have suntan lotion on. You never know. So we actually focus on grabbing more of the joint, more of the actual arm themselves in the gi. But we go back and forth. It's understanding what that person's wearing. Because if they're wearing a hoodie, well, that's basically going to be a good analog for a gi. If you've trained for grappling with a gi, that hoodie is going to work against them. If they're just wearing nothing but a t-shirt and you try to grab them, throw them by their clothing, that shirt's probably going to rip before you get them where you want them. So then you got to, you want to be sure you're well versed in actually manipulating body parts and actually joints and their balance. It's all part of a complicated system, and that comes with being efficient within your own art. At my job, those weird techniques work wonders. I do security, and I like the KISS method, to keep it simple, stupid, but the weird stuff works. The weird stuff can work, especially if it's unexpected. Yeah, there's been some bizarre things that have worked out there. This is a third-hand story. My friend and he had his instructor who was a high-level instructor, and he worked as a bouncer. And he said one time a guy got a hit off him because the guy unexpectedly jumped and hit him with 2 hands out and 2 feet out, and it actually connected because he was like, what the hell was that? The weird stuff does work sometimes because one, there's an element of surprise, or two, it might be a technique or something you haven't trained against. If you're a boxer, they know their jabs, their crosses, their uppercuts, their hooks. They're used to that, but a weird corkscrew something might sneak in there. Yeah, the weird stuff can work. And that's why I like Kenpo, because there's a lot of weird stuff in it. We have our basics. It's a giant toolbox. You learn your hammer, your screwdriver, your wrench, your main tools, but you might have this bizarre corkscrew thing down here. You're like, well, when the heck am I ever going to use that? But if someone brings that out or there's an application, then you understand how it works. So Kenpo tries to cram in its curriculum a lot of different techniques and moves for that reason, just to at least be familiar with what's out there. But yeah, when it comes to self-defense and fighting, you want to keep it simple. You don't want to do the flashy spinning stuff. But every once in a while, that weird stuff, that flashy stuff does land, and it does work. It's just a matter of risk versus reward. You have to assess, is the risk worth me trying this? Because if I don't land it, I might be in a lot of trouble. Should testing black belts be made to fail the first attempt as to prove humility and perseverance? I see most people pass on their first and only attempt, and I think it's a little lame. Good question. I think that really comes down to a student-by-student basis, because you do have your students who will dedicate themselves 100%. It's like the kids I mentioned earlier, who they'd come to class every day, go home, practice what they learned, research ahead of time, and come to class with questions to refine what they just learned. You have somebody who's doing that 4, 5, 6, 7 years. If they can maintain that level of quality at their black belt exam, if they can blow through their calisthenics, if they can meet all the requirements, if you can push them until they cry and they still perform, then I say they've earned it. If it's somebody who thinks they've just, okay, this is my black belt test, so if they're casual about it, then maybe they haven't earned it. I mean, the black belt, it's kind of a breaking point for a lot of people. And we had kids that were literally sparring the last 5 minutes of their test, and they were bawling because they were so tired. They were so sore. They might have had a bump nose or a bruised lip. They were exhausted and pushed to the end of their limits, but they kept going. That perseverance was there. If that student shows that strong perseverance and spirit and will, it really comes down to would you be happy if you put a black belt on them with them representing your school? That's the real question. Do they uphold the standards of your school? If you think they need a little bit of work, or if you think that their attitude is not quite where it should be, or if you feel they need some humility, then yes, hold them back and let them know why. And the right student will understand this. They might be mad. They might be disappointed. They might not want to wait the 6 months or a year to test again. But if they continue training after that and try harder, well, then they had some room to push. Then yes, then they have a chance to earn it again. If they get mad and they rage quit, well, then they weren't going to represent your school that well anyway. So I do think that comes down to a student-by-student basis. I don't think that should be an automatic fail the first time. That's a good way to lose a lot of students, especially those who have put in the time and effort. But I don't think it's a bad thing to keep expectations in check sometimes if you feel that they're not quite where they should be, or they're not quite trying as hard as they should be, or this is the moment they're supposed to be presenting themselves and they're only giving you 80 to 90%. All right, hold them back. Make them try it again. Let them know that the expectations are there. Should there be a rank cap for old people? No, because it goes back to, I think, what we talked about a little bit earlier, is a lot of the later ranks anyway are honorary, and it's time and grade. You can get a 3rd degree to a 5th degree black belt in most systems just by training. After that, generally speaking, it should be contribution to the art. So if you have someone who's 80 years old, but they've been teaching, they have that knowledge, they can walk up to a person and instruct a class, or they can point out details that you might not have seen before, they still have that knowledge. They might not be able to move like they did when they were younger, but does that make them any less representative of the time and effort and knowledge they put in? It's academic information. So no, I don't think there should be a cap for old people, because, again, everyone is different. I got my butt handed to me last month in sparring by a 66-year-old. He has been, you could tell his history. He's got twice the history I have in training. He moves like a 30-year-old and fast as hell. So, yeah, I can see him training another 30, 40 years, and I would give him whatever rank he holds, if not more, because he upholds it. He has that knowledge. Even if someone, there's a lot of Kenpo masters that are old and frail, but their knowledge is there. They have earned it. So as long as they're still representing that school, I don't think there should be a cap, because at that point in time, the ranks are honorary anyway. There's no 10th degree competition division at a tournament, because that's just not a thing, So the other ranks, it's really just a matter of respect and what they've earned knowledge-wise, and really what they've given back to a system, because you can still be really old and still contribute. You could teach. You can come up with new ideas. You can still revitalize an art, even if you can't fight like you could when you were younger. That's my personal opinion. Yes, but black belt tests should be failable. Black belt tests should absolutely be failable. Yes, to piggyback on what we said before, they should absolutely. Yeah, it's not a guarantee. Just a student showing up. And okay, a lot of formats, and we've talked about this as well, a lot of times your black belt test is a formality. A lot of schools, a lot of teachers will be testing you ahead of time. In our case, in our school with Kenpo, we had about a month where we had to come in and do special classes to make sure we had our techniques, to make sure we had our forms down, to fine-tune anything we didn't quite have. We had to prove our calisthenics. When the day of the test came, it was more of a final. It was really more about will and perseverance than the material at that point, because if we were invited or able to come into that last day of testing, our instructor knew we knew our material, knew we could fight, knew we were in shape, knew we could do our kata. We knew the material. The question was how we were handled it under pressure. So at that point in time, why you see a lot of people who don't fail their test, I think that could be attributed to a lot of that, because most people have already passed by the time they get to that day. It's just the last final step. You walk across the country, you're 10 steps away from the building. Well, you've still done the journey. Are you going to get sent home because you haven't made those last 10 steps? It's about that last little push to make sure to test their will and see how they handle everything under pressure. To me, it's checking the student's application under pressure. Yes, they might know that technique. Can they perform it, or can they adapt it when everyone's watching them, when they have that pressure on them? That's the test as far as I'm concerned. So most students who reach that level have already proven themselves, but I do think that should not be an automatic pass. If they don't adapt, if they freeze, or if they're not quite where they should be, then yes, those tests should be absolutely failable. But again, individual by individual basis. When talking about age and ability thresholds, a student should show their spirit by being forced outside their comfort zone. Absolutely. And that's where, yeah, right, absolutely. A martial artist who is a true martial artist will always try to put themselves outside that comfort zone, which usually means learning something new or learning something different, doing something another way. Yeah, exactly. It doesn't matter how old they are. If they're 80 years old and they're trying something new, we've had people come to class at age 70 to do jiu-jitsu and judo. My hat's off to them, because I know how sore I am the next day. I am 42 and I'm still trying to get back into better shape. I know I'm not going to be 20 ever again, and I can't take the abuse I could when I was 20, but I know how I feel the next day after being thrown around for 2 hours. Watching the 7-year-old come on the mat, they have so much respect, whether they stick with it or not. The fact that they put themselves out there to try it is commendable, because it's not an easy decision to take. That shows that drive, that shows that hunger, and that is stepping outside their comfort zone. And even if they struggle, a lot of them have come back. And yes, stepping outside your comfort zone is something I think a martial artist should do their whole life. Once you're complacent with your material, you're not trained anymore. You're not a student anymore. And I think no matter what rank you are, you're always a student. You should always try to find something new, because I don't care what system you are a master in, how many black belts you have, it is impossible to learn everything about every art. And it's one of those things that the more you train, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And I think that is the nature of the art. And once you realize that, then you try to accomplish that. You try to go pursue that knowledge. And the more of that knowledge you pursue, you realize there's more you don't know. The more I train, the more like a beginner I feel. And I love it, because it's humbling when I feel like I've spent all these years doing something. I'm like, I suck. I know nothing. I go home, I write down notes, and I think about what was uncomfortable, and then I try to implement that into my training. I try to think about, well, why was it uncomfortable? And I try to learn that until the next time I'll learn something new. I'm like, I know nothing. That should be the cycle of a martial artist. You should feel good about yourself. Yay, I know this. And then you're like, I know nothing. So we should always go from white belts to black belts to white belts to black belts to white belts to black belts. That cycle should always keep continuing, in my opinion. What do I think about rank skipping? I think it's irrelevant in terms of color belts. That's, again, it's a curriculum marker. We have students in school, grade school. Sometimes kids are really good and they're advanced and they might skip a grade. I think it's okay as long as it's appropriate. As long as if that student can perform the material of the upper belt rank, whether it's a black belt, whether it's a blue belt, or whatever rank it is, if they can perform it, if they can understand it, if they can repeat the knowledge, and if they are as proficient at that material as anyone else at that level, why not? Why make them go through at that point, you can just be milking money off them off a belt test. If they can do it, if they represent it, I see no reason why they can't be it. Black belt ranks, you don't usually see skipped ranks too much in black belt, not that often. It does happen. A lot of times that I've seen, it's been self-imposed. I have different opinions about that. But the upper Dan ranks and black belts are usually time-based, so it doesn't really make sense to go from a 2nd degree to a 5th degree to skip that, unless that person's been training for 30 years without ranking and they have put that level into it. That could be an exception. But what I think about belt skipping, has the person earned it? Can they perform that? Again, the belt is nothing but a curriculum marker. Does it make them any better of a fighter on the street? If you promote someone to have them skip 3 belts, are they going to fight better on the street? No. Are they going to defend themselves any better? No. It's just about what they know. It's just a marker in class. A fighter shouldn't think of his belt. He should think of this, will this save me in a real fight? Exactly. Because once you step out of that classroom, you could be head honcho on that mat. You would have a 10th degree black belt on that mat. Boss of the world. The second you step out those doors, that belt does nothing for you. It does not protect you from anything. It is not knife proof. It is not bulletproof. It does not make you able to fight everyone in the world. Even a white belt can get a shot in. The novice, sometimes the more dangerous people to fight against are the inexperienced. So exactly, a person should be training. The belts are nice. Belts are fun, and they have their place in the classroom. But a student learning the martial arts should be focused on making it work for them. I agree with you 100%. That is a fantastic point to bring up. And that's why you see MMA fighters do so well, because they don't have that belt. The only belt they're after is that prize belt at the end, and they have to fight their asses off to get that. So it's all about being efficient. They're training, they're thinking about, now, they're specialized training. A fighter going into the ring, they're focusing on the sport. They're not training for self-defense. They're training specifically for their upcoming opponent. They study that opponent. They base their strategy around that opponent. They're going in with that one goal, but their whole focus is not, well, what rank am I in my old art? Their focus is on, what do I have to do to win? So that is a fantastic point. You wouldn't skip degree. Okay, so Tom Lyman says you wouldn't skip degrees. I don't think, but for color belts and competitive styles, I think it's fine within reason. Agreed. Some students come like twice a week, others come more, and maybe they have more talent and put in more work time. Exactly. It comes back to, it's really immaterial. It's just the belt is where they are in the classroom, where you feel they are in the curriculum. In competitions, you will see that sometimes people fudge ranks so they can jump into another class. So if you have a student who's a blue belt, like an intermediate rank, and they're going to go into a competition and they want to fight the brown belts and the advanced belts, and they want to wear it up, and you want to give them that brown belt, that's up to you. If you feel they can hold their own with brown belts and black belts, by all means. But if not, well, maybe you shouldn't skip them. It's all to each individual person. So Scorch 1028 says, after 30 years in the art, a 9th degree Kenpo instructor was awarded a 10th degree by all of his black belts. I think that every martial arts school should operate like that. Yes, and this is interesting, and this is a topic I want to explore a little bit later. We've been talking to some other instructors about this. It's tricky getting 10th degree black belt because, of course, the number one question comes up is, well, who promoted you? To assume the rank of 10th degree black belt is to accept the responsibility of being a leader. Not just a leader in the school, but now you're like a patriarch or a matriarch. You are now the head of that branch. Everyone is looking to you to be the example. And I think what you just said is the appropriate way to do it. If you're a 9th degree, well, if there's not a 10th degree to promote you, then being voted in by your peers, whether your other fellow instructors or your students, the whole community, the whole board, if they're looking at you and they vote you into that level, well, that means they're asking you to be their leader. They are looking up to you enough that they say, we want to follow your example. You are our role model. We want to follow your example. That, I think, is a very appropriate way to do it. I don't like the idea of awarding yourself a 10th degree, but that gets tricky. That could have that's a whole topic for another day. But I'm going to agree with you, Scorch. I think every martial art should be like that. To be a grandmaster, to be the top, if you're not promoted by a 10th degree, then I think you should be promoted by your people. But there's some caution with this. I'm not going to name any names because I don't know this firsthand, but I have heard a lot of stories told. I've seen some examples online. There are organizations who will promote people to grandmaster level so that they can be promoted to the next level up. So you might have 7th and 8th degrees wanting to promote their master to 10th degrees so that they can get their 8th or 9th. That does happen, and you got to be cautious with that. But to put on that 10th degree black belt, I think there needs to be an understanding that when you wear that belt, you are assuming the role of the leader. Everyone now looks to you. You set the model. You set the course of action. They're following your lead. The system is in your hands now, at least that branch of it. And if you're not prepared to take that role and be that for those people and be there for those people, they're going to look to you for answers. You're going to have to teach them. You're going to have to provide them. You're going to have to represent that. If you don't feel you could do that, do not accept that rank. But if you put on that rank, and you can do that, then that's what you are. You have become a master because now you have left your imprint. You have left your impressions. You have a following of people whose lives you've touched and changed, and they are recognizing that, and they are now putting you to that role of responsibility. And I think it's an honor. Oh my God. I can't even imagine the honor to have that. So yes, I agree 100%. I like the way it's handled when it's handled in that fashion. Excellent, excellent point. Question: if someone with a disability can't spar full contact but knows their curriculum and can do everything properly? Good question. Good question. This one is also tricky because it goes back to the belts don't mean anything outside the school. There are people, everyone joins the martial arts for a reason, and most of the time it's to improve themselves. Whether it be they just want to fight better, they want to be faster, they want to live longer and healthier, or they're trying to rehab from an injury, or they want to compete, or they want to be able to protect themselves. Aside from those who do it just as a hobby, most people join the martial arts in some fashion to improve themselves or improve an area of their life. And it's not always about fighting. And as we talked about, we did an interview a couple weeks ago with Ian McLeod, a man with a traumatic brain injury who used karate to rehab himself and did wonderful, wonderful things and really came a long way. I think that you set your own course and you have to follow your own milestones and your own goals. And it's not always fighting because Not every fight occurs out on the street. Not every fight is a self-defense against an attacker. Sometimes you're defending yourself from time, from an injury, from yourself. And I think it's up to the instructor to really really look at each student as an individual and what their needs are and what their base foundation they're coming from is, and make a judgment of how they're going to promote. Can someone with a disability achieve a black belt, even though they might not be able to fight a black belt in another system? That's up to the instructor. I think it's okay in certain ways, as long as they have persevered and they have pushed themselves and they have accomplished, as long as they understand what they're doing. And here's the interesting thing too. It's about knowing the curriculum and understanding all the basics and understanding what you're doing and knowing the why. Sometimes, and knowing the how, but sometimes being able to do it might not be there. So a lot of disabled people that I have seen will modify it. If they can't do a particular move, or maybe they can't fight a certain way, if they can make modifications, or that they can show that they can adapt the art to cope with or get by, even if that means finding new ways to get out of a situation instead of fighting them, then have they not learned? Have they not reached that level of proficiency where they can defend themselves, or they can modify the material, where they have the same understanding? It goes back to the person who's 80 years old. They might not be able to defend themselves the same way they could before. They might not be able to move, but that knowledge is there. Can this person disabled, can they teach? That's a really hard question. My jiu-jitsu instructor talked about how he had students come in that were missing an arm. Can that person ever fight the same way as a person with two arms? No, but the techniques were modified to do one-arm throws. There are exceptions, and I don't think anybody should be excluded from the martial arts, because anyone, especially someone with a disability, who steps into that mat, they get more respect for me than people who are fully healthy, because they have this extra challenge. And you know how much courage and guts it takes for them to get to a point where they admit they need help, or they're desperate and they want to seek out some improvement, and they step on that mat. That person is a brother and sister in that classroom. That person should still be expected to work just as hard as everyone else. They have to work with their instructor and set their goals. They have to understand their limits. Understanding your limits is a big part of being a martial artist. Again, I'm at a point now where there's stuff I really want to do. There's stuff I could do, I can't do anymore. I'm not doing the jump spinning stuff anymore. I'm feeling it in my knees. I have some knee issues, and I've got age-related issues. It's happening. I have to accept the fact that there are things I will never be able to do in the martial arts as much as I want to do. A person who's got a disability, I can't even fathom the stuff they're going through, because there's stuff, whether it's something they used to be able to do or it's stuff they've never been able to do, they are facing real challenges. And if they step onto that mat or roll onto that mat or whatever, if they come into that classroom and they put in the same work as everyone else, and at the end of the day, they can disseminate that information, they can understand it, and they can pass on that knowledge and fulfill others' lives and touch other people in the same way that they were touched, then yes, I feel they've earned that rank. It doesn't always come down to how well you can fight in the street or how well you can perform in a tournament. A black belt is not a fighting mechanism. It is not a magic cape that you put on. A black belt is a symbol that you have pushed yourself outside of your boundaries. You've broken your boundaries and you've reset them, and you've broken and reset them many times. And you've now reached an area, you're a much better person now than you were when you started. You understand the world now. You understand the pieces. You know what you have to do. Now the work is to really get done and build from there. So do I feel that they should hold belt ranks like everyone else? I do. And I think it needs to be an individual situation, just because we all fight different battles. It's all about why you train. We all have our own fights. Not every fight's on the asphalt. Not every fight's in the octagon. We have battles every day in our lives. And yes, I think the martial arts, and I'm so adamant about this, and I'm so passionate about this. That's one of the reasons that Zach and I started this channel, is that this is a very important message that I think needs to be spread, is that there's so much good in the martial arts. There's so much garbage out there on YouTube, and so much garbage, so much hate, so much politics, so much, oh, look how crappy that is. Oh, here's the fake stuff. We've all seen it. It's all there. That's not what we want to focus on. There's so much good that's overlooked. And I don't care if it's a style that people don't like. There's still good in that style because it works for someone. Maybe you don't look at it and think, oh, that's garbage. That's never going to work for me. Okay, well, what are you doing with it? Are you going in the ring? Okay, it might not work for you. But guess what? That person's got a broken back, and that style has now helped them be able to walk again. Should that be looked down upon than any other art? No. So, no, I have so much respect, and we have a lot of viewers who are facing a lot of physical challenges and disabilities, and I am very grateful that you are a part of our channel, because I think that message is even more important when people like that train, because they are setting a better example than the rest of us, because they're saying, look, I know I have limits, I know I have challenges, but look, I'm going to do it anyway. So yes, I do believe that a person who's got a disability, who might not be able to fight or spar like a black belt would normally, that they can still achieve their black belt because they are fighting their own fights, their own battles. And thank you so much for asking that question, because now you got me all revved up. But yeah, that's where I feel on that. So much disrespect from people that really don't have an informed opinion. Too many keyboard warriors. There's too many keyboard warriors. It's so easy to criticize at your desk. It's so easy to look at someone else doing something and be like, oh, that's garbage. That's not the way to do it. And honestly, fine. That's your freedom to type that. But if you're going to type that, if you're going to be that way with someone, then I would expect you to put yourself on video and put yourself out there and show us how it's done better. Too many keyboard warriors. So, okay, we're going to wrap it up in a couple minutes to see if there's any more questions we can take. In a way, there are ways to deal with techniques like standing in a narrow position. Exactly. There's so many ways you could adapt something. Okay, look at Superfoot Bill Wallace, for example. He is an amazing fighter. He tore his knee up really, really bad when he was young, to the point it never healed right. Look at his work. He's undefeated in his career. Undefeated, and he can only kick with one leg. And what did he do? Well, he understood he couldn't kick with that leg, so he adopted all his fighting. He adopted a sideways fighting style. And guess what? He is really, really good at it. Can he use both legs and both arms like everyone else? No, he's basically down a limb. Has he made up for it? You betcha. Even now, I see this guy now. I see him at seminars now, and he's still a phenomenal martial artist. He's still going to kick you. He's still fast. He still can kick you in the head, and faster than you see it coming. So exactly. So there's you just have to, and that's part of that. You have to find that adaptation. Okay. Scorch asks, I would love to see a video of you interviewing Kenpo Joe Rubello. He possesses a wealth of knowledge in the martial arts. Look, I love Mr. Rubello. I have had the privilege of talking to him a couple times. He is absolutely a wealth of knowledge. He puts out YouTube videos. If you guys haven't watched him yet, go look him up, Kenpo Joe. He puts out like introspective. He breaks down a lot of academic topics of Kenpo, and they are fascinating. I learned something every time. And I had a very distinct privilege of speaking with him last year. We talked about Kenpo freestyle techniques. He volunteered his time to talk to me because he was really proficient in those. And he spent a lot of time in teaching those. And when I expressed an interest in learning the Kenpo freestyle sparring techniques, he reached out to me and he gave me his time. And we had a wonderful, wonderful talk. It was one of those things. I got off the phone going, I know nothing, but I loved it. And I took so many notes. Yes, if you guys have a chance to talk to or watch anything from Mr. Joe Rubello, I highly recommend it. He is an absolute wealth of knowledge. He's been there for a long time. He's known a lot of the system. He holds a high level of respect in my opinion. So absolutely, thank you for bringing it up. I would love to interview him, honestly. I might reach out to him. Thank you for bringing it up. He's a wonderful martial artist. Okay, is the history of American Kenpo important for testing? In my art, Shaolin Kenpo Karate, it's very important in order to pass the black belt test. The students need to know where they came from. I would say yes, to a degree. It depends on the school. If it's an MMA style school, if it's more of a tournament competitive school, it might not matter as much. But if you really want to learn the art truly, I think it's important to at least know where it came from. No, a little bit. I mean, I don't expect a student to be able to write a whole dissertation on the whole life accomplishments of Ed Parker and every aspect he went to and every knowledge of every academic model he put together. But I do think you should know who your grandmaster is. You should know a rough idea of your lineage, what the roots of your arts are, what the elements are embedded in your art, and the general history. I think the more history you know about your own art, the better, because sometimes having that context will make things make sense. With Kenpo, if I didn't know that Ed Parker did judo, there's techniques I look at, I'm like, well, this stands out. This is kind of weird. But by knowing that, you're like, okay, I understand that. So I do think that in order to pass the black belt test, yes, I think there should be, generally speaking, an overall general knowledge of the system that you're training in, just because, you know, the more you know, the better. And the more you know about your art, the better you're going to digest your art and teach your art. So should it be a requirement? I think to a certain degree it should be. How deep of a level? I think it's up to the individual instructor. As long as you know the basics, the wheres, the whens, the hows, and the whys, you know, it's all about, it's part of the art, it's part of history. I do think you should learn a level of it. Okay, we're gonna take one more question. Let's see. Do I have any other notes here? Well, since we were on topic, I will throw out one little bonus thing. We had a couple of extra questions. I just wrote down. It's not necessarily related to belt ranks, but we've talked about so many different styles here. I had 2 questions. Actually, I had 3 questions. Bill Taylor asked me, what got me into the martial arts and why did I choose Kenpo? Just to answer that question quickly, what got me into the martial arts was being a kid. The Karate Kid was a huge influence on me. I always had this fear of as a kid, not being able to protect myself. I was a small, skinny kid, and I was lucky enough not to have a regular bully, but there were kids that picked on me. There were bigger kids that shoved me. When a big kid shoved me, I hated the feeling of having my body push out of my control and not being able to respond or not knowing how to respond. That scared the hell out of me as a kid. And then I see a movie like The Karate Kid, and I see this kid. It's not an action film. He's not Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's not a Chuck Norris war movie. It is a kid trying to survive high school. And it was a message of, look, anybody can learn this. And there's more to it than just fighting. And that really kind of planted the seeds. So as a kid, I grew up just loving the martial arts. And of course, I love the action movies too. But I expressed interest when I was about 12 to my parents, 13, that I wanted to train in karate. We lived in Long Island at the time. And they're like, oh, okay. And we never really talked about it. But then a year later, we moved down here to Florida, and my parents came up to me with a flyer we saw in the paper, and they said, hey, look, here's some karate classes. You want to try it? I went, yeah, okay, sure. 14 years old, I didn't know one style from another. I knew there was Kung Fu and karate. I didn't know about the different flavors of anything. It was a Kenpo school. I tried it. I fell in love with it immediately. I had just seen The Perfect Weapon, so I walked in, and I saw that Jeff Speakman poster on the wall. I'm like, oh, this is that art? It was all downhill from there. I loved it. And so basically I got into Kenpo by accident. It was a flyer my parents found in the paper, and I wouldn't change anything. I absolutely love it. I'm at a point now though where I'm trying to attain other knowledge because I want to explore the history of arts. I want to explore other roots, and that leads us to 2 other questions. I apologize if I pronounced your name incorrectly, but 𝗘𝗫𝗖𝗘𝗦𝗓 and Brian Walters both asked me what 3 arts have I not done that would be super quick to try out, and we'll end this on that. What are 3 arts that I have not tried that I would love to try out right now? One, I think boxing. I have never done any formal boxing. We have a little bit of elements of it in Kenpo. We've done some basic drills in class, but I think I would like to take an actual boxing course. Boxing, I think, is one of the most powerful striking arts there is. And I think that could accentuate and implement itself into any art. So boxing would definitely be one. I am intrigued by Kyokushin. Ever since we did the history of Kyokushin episode, I have such a level of respect for those guys. The conditioning, I love the conditioning they do. I love the power they do. And I do think that if I could survive the training, that I could implement that in my own training because I'm a big guy. I'm not as fast as I used to be, but I spar. But there's a joke going around. They call me the wall because I'll take hits, but I don't move back. I just absorb them. And I have to be able to absorb them because I get hit so much. So looking at Kyokushin is just how it's power driven. And those guys don't move back. It's standing your ground and just pummeling forward. So I think that would be really interesting and hard to learn, but I think I could get a lot of good instruction out of that. So Kyokushin I would try, boxing I would try, and I think the 3rd art would probably be some sort of a tactical weapon or a kabuto, just to learn some sort of weapon art, whether it be knife fighting, just weapon defense drills, like a specialized course in defense drills. Arnis and Kali 6 I think are fascinating. I would love to learn the 𝗘𝗓. I like exotic weapons, but I just don't know how to use them. So yeah, that would be my answer. So boxing, Kyokushin, and some sort of a weapon art I think would be the first 3 I would jump at if I had the opportunity to try. So I think that's going to wrap it up for today. Guys, I thank you so much. There was so much wonderful discussion. And thank you to all of those out there who did the highlighted messages. I really appreciate you guys. You guys are fantastic supporters of this channel. And if you guys like these live streams, we'll do more of them. I actually really enjoy talking to you. We get a really good sense of engagement and where our viewers are and the stuff that you guys want to talk about and see. So we always try to modify our channel and our material to what you guys want. I mean, there's stuff that we like to talk about, and we're going to throw in fun stuff now and then, but you guys are our family. This is your dojo. This is all of our dojos. I mean, it's one big dojo verse we're in together. and I love talking to all of you. So if you guys want to do more live streams, we'll do these more often. We'll do them as weekly videos or maybe bi-weekly or whatever. We'll start working something out. But if this is something you guys like, we'll keep doing it because this is fun. This is fun. And you guys teach me so much. And I can't thank you enough. And we'll probably do another live stream next week, most likely. We'll let you guys know. But because we're still trying to get History of Goju-Ryu done. We can't wait to bring that to you. So I think we're going to start doing, we have a lot more material coming. And our goal is to spread this knowledge. So many good points were brought up today about different perspectives. I think our viewers and all of you guys have some wonderful perspectives on the arts, and we need to share that. And we need to counteract all the garbage and toxins that are out there, and let's spread some good messages about the martial arts. Let's always look for the good because there's more good than bad. And we're working. This year's been tough schedule-wise. The Goju-Ryu has been a big heavy weight on our schedule, but we have a lot of material. We have a lot of material coming. It's just been a matter of us where we've been sitting down and spending a lot of time getting our ducks in a row. So if you guys like it, we're gonna do more live streams. We're gonna do more supplemental videos. We're gonna do more history videos. A lot more interviews are coming in our standard videos. So we're excited. And thank you guys for making this channel what it is. I love you all. I appreciate you. And we'll see you next week in some form or another. So thank you so much for joining today. And I'm going to try to go back and read. There's a lot of good chats that came in. Unfortunately, I can't read everything. So I do like to go back once the video is published. I do like to go back and scan and see anything I missed because you guys give so much insight that it's just so much I can't read all at once. But I do try, and I do try to read comments. And if you're watching this and it's not live, please, by all means, put your comments down below in the description or below the description. I do go back. I read almost every single comment that I can. I can't always reply, but I read most comments that come in. So if you've got more questions or something to elaborate or want to see more topics, please leave them down in the comments below. Thank you again, everyone, so much. Hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you all again here next week. Bye-bye.